Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du, fa'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qala Allah ta'ala fil Qur'anil hakim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qul ta'ala atlu ma harrama rabbukum alaykum alla tushriku bihi shay'un wa bil walidayni ihsana wa la taqtulu awladakum min imlaq nahnu narzuqukum wa iyyahum wa la taqrabul fawahisha ma zahara minha wa ma batan وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ ذَلِكُمْ وَصَّاكُمْ بِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَظِيمُ. The verse which I have recited translates as follows. The Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is instructed by Allah to say to people, "Come, I will recite what your Lord has forbidden to you." In other words, what your Lord has made haram to you. Set up no partner with him, and do good to parents, nor kill your children for poverty. We provide for you and for them. Nor go near to indecencies, open or secret, nor kill the soul which Allah has made sacred, except in the course of justice. This He enjoins upon you that you may understand. In an earlier khutbah, I quoted a verse of the Holy Quran which occurs only a little earlier than these verses. And that verse tells the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to say to people, "I do not find in what is revealed to me anything forbidden for an eater to eat, except if it dies of itself, or blood poured forth, or the flesh of swine, for surely that is unclean, or what is a transgression when a name other than the name of Allah has been invoked on it." And that was chapter 6 verse 145. And the verse which I recited at the beginning of this khutbah is also chapter 6 Surat Al-An'am verse 151, occurring a little after this 145. And this verse made it clear, the verse 145, what it is that is forbidden or haram for eating. And also that in the Holy Quran nothing is forbidden to be eaten except the specific items listed in that verse. Then in the verse which I recited today, and I didn't recite the one immediately following it, but we'll deal with that in later khutbahs. In this verse which I recited and in the next one, we are told what is really forbidden in life. And this is why I've given the title to this khutbah, the Haram and Halal of Behavior and Morals. And this removes the misunderstanding which is in the minds of most Muslims, that forbidden or haram relates mainly to matters to do with eating and drinking. The first thing mentioned as forbidden here, "I will recite what your Lord has forbidden to you, set up no partner with him." So that is the first thing which is forbidden, for a person to consider something other than God, other than Allah, as being a partner of God, or sharing some powers or attributes possessed only by God, something which shares with God. certain qualities. And this is what is called, as you know, committing shirk. Now, shirk is not only the actual worship of something else that you literally and physically bow down before alongside the one God. If you actually physically worship something as also a God apart from the one God, for example, an idol or a historical personality or some figure from a myth or legend, that is not the only shirk. Now, among Muslims, no one actually worships something other than Allah in prayer. However, there are many who obey religious leaders, political leaders, or the wealthy and the powerful in everything which they tell them to do. And many of these followers are very proud of their total submission to such leaders. When they are following religious leaders in this way, their followers believe that Allah will be pleased with them only if they obey the religious leader, the scholar, or the imam without question. And in case of the worldly powerful ones who are obeyed, their followers believe that they need to obey them in order to be successful in the world, to reach higher positions, or even just to survive in this world. They need to obey them. All this is forbidden because it makes a person behave in practice as if he believes that these leaders and powerful ones possess some of the powers and qualities of God. Now, I may add here that in the history of religions, all religions, there are many examples of religious leaders justifying the actions of the rulers or the king of the country on the basis of the religion, when those actions of the rulers were really based on their own desires and policies. And these religious leaders were either seeking favors from their king, or they were actually paid servants of the state. In case of Muslims, and as I said, this applies to the history of all religions. In case of Muslim kings had ulama or religious scholars in their pay, who were paid by them salaries, and they would issue rulings or fatwas to justify the actions or the whims of the kings and rulers. And this is how, for example, the legitimacy of having concubines, whom in Urdu we call laundries, slave women used for sexual purposes. This is how this was brought into Islamic law. Kings wanted to indulge in this practice for their own desires, so they called upon their employed ulama to justify this practice from the teachings of Islam. And the ulama complied with the instruction. Another example is, once a Sunni Muslim king wanted to attack the neighboring Shia kingdom, but he realized that a Muslim was not allowed to kill another Muslim. So this was at an earlier period in history, when at least Muslims had some sense of shame, that the king realized that a Muslim was not allowed to kill another Muslim. So at least they had that realization, which you don't have anymore. So that Sunni king approached his ulama and he got them to declare Shias as unbelievers or kafirs, to make it allowable for him to attack that kingdom and then say he wasn't infringing the teachings of Islam, that a Muslim can't kill another Muslim. He was attacking unbelievers. Now, these are all examples of shirk, where you give the position of Allah to someone other than Allah. Now, in case of ordinary followers, of religious leaders or political leaders, they, out of ignorance, the followers actually believe that their leaders are representatives of God on earth. But they are just the ordinary followers. In case of the ulama that I've just mentioned, obeying the commands of their rulers to seek their favor or out of fear, of course those, they are religious scholars. They are educated. They know full well that they are treating unworthy worldly rulers as if they were God. On the other hand, I must add that in the history of Islam, there have been many reputable and upstanding religious scholars from the beginning who refused any kind of employment of the government, any type, or any payment from the rulers because they feared that this would compromise their independence of judgment. And our great collectors of hadith, our leaders of what's called fiqh, they were people of that caliber. The next teaching listed in these verses, such that if you neglect it, it is an act of shirk. That next teaching is do good to parents. And as I said, if you neglect this teaching and the others which follow, then that is an act of haram, which is why I've entitled this khutbah, the Haram and Halal of behavior and morals. Do good to parents. A similar teaching is also in the 10 Commandments of the Bible, and it occurs in the 10 Commandments in the same sequence as here in the Holy Quran. The first 4 of the 10 Commandments, and you find them in the Bible, the first 4 relate to worshipping only the one God, not worshipping anything other than God, respecting His name, and observing the sanctity of the day of the week that God had declared as sacred, which of course in that law, in that Sharia, was a Saturday. And to a limited extent, it is our Friday. So after those 4 of the first 4 of the 10 Commandments, the 5th one is this, and I'll read it out. Honor your father and your mother. Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 16. The father and the mother bring a human physically into this world, and from their very nature, they feel it their loving duty to bring that child up to adulthood physically. That is physically. And if they are responsible parents, they give their offspring moral guidance as well. So it is as if the parents represent the work of God on earth and they act as Allah's agents. But of course, not all parents give good moral guidance. So Allah has made the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the spiritual father of all Muslims, and his wives as the spiritual mothers of all Muslims, from whom they can receive guidance till today by studying their teachings and their example. So then, after saying do good to parents, the next teaching in that verse is, do not kill your children for poverty. We provide for them, we provide for you and for them. And in another place where this verse occurs, the words fear of are added, nor kill your children for fear of poverty. Here it just says for poverty. So people say, well, fear of should be understood here. Do not kill your children for fear of poverty. We provide for you and for them. After mentioning the duty of the offspring towards parents, immediately the right of the child to his or her life is mentioned. And there are 2 points to note about this command if you think carefully. At that time in Arabia, the only children who were killed by their parents were baby girls. and not boys. But this verse refers to all children, male or female. And moreover, any such incident of the killing of a baby daughter that we read about in history as painful incidents, it was actually not because of fear of poverty at all, but because of feelings of shame and dishonor in society. And the Holy Quran tells us this directly. And some people, in fact many people who indulged in this custom were wealthy higher-ups who feared shame and dishonor in society. There was no poverty for them at all. Now this cruel custom of Arabia of the time is mentioned in the Holy Quran in more than one place. In one place the Holy Quran says, "And when the birth of a daughter is announced to one of them, his face becomes dark and he is full of pleasure. He is full of displeasure." His face becomes dark and he is full of, you could say, either a anger or resentment or a displeasure. He hides himself from the people because of the evil of what is announced to him. Shall he keep it with disgrace or bury it in the dust? Now surely evil is what they judge. These are the words of the Holy Quran, chapter 16, verses 58 to 59. That father goes around hiding himself out of shame that a daughter has been born. So, coming back to this verse, this killing of children, what is called infanticide, both male and female, and doing it for the fear of poverty, did not fully apply in the society in which the Holy Quran was revealed. But the Holy Quran is for all circumstances and all times. As to the birth of daughters, as I said here, both males and females are mentioned, but as regards birth of female children, there are cultures in this world that have always existed and which continue to still exist, and some of the followers of those cultures, in fact, are Muslims now. They embraced Islam. They regarded and still regard the birth of a daughter as a financial loss and disadvantage in the future. The daughter costs them money at her marriage and she joins another family, while a son remains with the parents and helps to increase their income and wealth. Traditionally, a son worked with the father in the father's employment or business. So these people in those cultures, they might not have killed their daughters in infancy. But in modern times, with that same attitude, with the developments in science, many such parents try to prevent births of daughters by aborting the birth if a scan should show that the child to be born is female. So you could say they are actually not literally killing a living human being, a born human being, but still it is equivalent to that. And this fear of poverty is not necessarily that they are poor then, but the financial loss and disadvantage in the future which they fear. And then another example in this modern age is actually from what you might call a non-religious secular country, and that is government policy in the People's Republic of China, which, as I will later mention, has now changed. Now the population there was growing too rapidly, and quite rightly it was feared that this would greatly impoverish the country in a few years' time. So the government introduced a one-child policy around the year 1980. So that is within our lifetimes, not long ago. This one-child policy in China forced married couples to have no more than one child. And this was rigorously enforced by the government through forced abortions, sterilization, and fines and loss of benefits for having more than one child. You had to pay extra taxes. However, this policy had to be relaxed from the year 2013 onwards due to its damaging effects. And there is in the United States a social and economic research institution, Brookings, and they say in a report published in 2016, they say that from the year 2000, that's 20 years after this policy was introduced, and I quote them, the harmful consequences of continuing the ill-conceived one-child policy could be seen around the year 2000 with a shrinking younger generation and reduced workforce as compared to the older generation. So, and their research says that China's one-child policy will be remembered as one of the costliest lessons of misguided public policy making. The harm caused by the policy is long-term and irreparable. And as I said, this article was written in 2016, and it reported that in 2015, the one-child policy was already changed to a two-child policy. And later on, in 2021, the Chinese government changed this to a three-child policy. And then it was also discovered that some other countries in Asia, which had similar rapid population growth and high birth rates, that they had controlled their rapid population growth by encouraging the education and empowerment of women, and not by forced birth controls. So with changed circumstances, by educating women, giving them jobs and employment, people automatically themselves volunteered to change their ways and started having fewer children without the forced measures which the Chinese government took and then have had to retract. Some scholars of the Holy Quran of several centuries ago wrote that in this verse, when it says killing your children, what is actually meant is depriving them of education and knowledge. You see, when they saw in this verse that your children is male and female, so they thought, well, this can't be about the killing of baby daughters. So they interpreted this as meaning that killing is depriving them of education and knowledge. And Maulana Muhammad Ali, in his English translation of the Holy Quran, he agrees with them, and he writes under another verse which also mentions the killing of children and prohibits it. What Maulana Muhammad Ali writes is this: infanticide, and that's the word which means child killing, infanticide in the case of daughters was found among the Arabs, but this was not for fear of poverty. According to Imam Raghib, and he was a scholar of the Holy Quran of several centuries ago, according to Raghib, killing of children here means not giving them proper education, and ignorance or intellectual death is treated here as actually killing them or death. And Maulana Muhammad Ali goes on to say that the word awlad, children, includes both males and females, and this explanation is therefore more reasonable, that killing your children means, in this verse, depriving them of education, keeping them in ignorance, and that is intellectual death. And in his Urdu commentary of the Holy Quran, Maulana Muhammad Ali writes, under the verse which I recited at the beginning of this khutbah, he writes that, and I paraphrase him, I'm not quoting him word for word, he writes that many people do not send their children for education only for the reason that they are poor and can't afford it, or for the fear that they will become poor by spending on their children's education. In this verse, after mentioning the rights which are due to parents from their children, the rights due to the children from their parents are mentioned as being that they must be given good education. And after quoting Maulana Muhammad Ali, I may add here that modern Western governments realized, perhaps 100 years or so ago, the need to remove this obstacle of poverty of the family from standing in the way of children's education. And therefore, those countries introduced free universal education up to a certain age. So in that sense, they acted on the teaching, do not kill your children for fear of poverty. They acted on this teaching in the sense in which many interpreters of the Holy Quran had interpreted it, that killing of children is to deprive them of education. And if Muslim countries had also acted on this, and much earlier, then the rate of literacy and education in their countries would be much higher than it is now. Now, the verse which I recited at the beginning, after this point, killing of children for fear of poverty, goes on to list several other fundamental qualities that Muslims must display in their behavior towards others. And the verse immediately following this lists more such fundamental qualities. And these we will cover in later khutbahs. And we end here with the prayer that may Allah enable us to live up to these standards of behavior mentioned in these verses. Ameen. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quranil Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malikun barru rahim.